The morning fog over Atlanta's airport lifted slowly, casting streaks of sunlight across the terminal glass as Derrick Coleman, a 39-year-old mechanic from Raleigh, North Carolina, walked briskly toward the security checkpoint. His duffel bag slapped lightly against his side with each determined stride, worn boots squeaking against the tile floor. For Derrick, this wasn't just another day, and this wasn't just another flight. It was a chance, maybe the only one he'd get, to land a job that could finally turn the tide for him and his family. Flight 212 to Charlotte wasn't just a trip across state lines, it was the door to a future he'd been chasing for more than a decade. Derrick had spent years working second-hand tools in back alley garages, fixing engines with duct tape, and patience always chasing the next paycheck. He'd raised his son alone since his ex left, taken night shifts so he could attend PTA meetings, and juggled bills like puzzles that never had enough pieces. His mother's health had declined in recent months, adding hospital visits and medications to an already strained budget. This interview at Velocity Motors, a corporate position with benefit structure and a real salary, felt like a lifeline. It was more than just work. It was dignity. He kept checking the overhead signs, eyes darting between gate numbers and the ticking time on his phone screen. Terminal C, Gate 18. Final boarding in 24 minutes. He calculated the walk in his head security in 10, sprint to the gate in 6, maybe less, if he cut the line or if the TSA officer was in a good mood. Every second mattered. He adjusted the strap on his bag and veered toward the shortest checkpoint, his pulse a steady drumbeat of anticipation. That's when he saw her. An elderly woman standing near the barrier where the line split, surrounded by 3 mismatched suitcases. Her coat, once a bright sky blue, had dulled with time, the edges fraying gently like paper worn thin. Her silver hair was tied into a loose bun, unraveling in the airport breeze, and her hands trembled faintly as she tried and failed to hoist her largest bag onto the conveyor belt. Dozens of people passed her by, business travelers glued to Bluetooth calls, families wrangling restless toddlers, tourists glued to their phones. Not one of them stopped. Derrick's legs slowed before his mind did. His eyes flicked to the nearby clock, 22 minutes now. He could still make it, but his gaze returned to the woman, to the way she kept trying to lift the suitcase jaw set in quiet determination, pride fraying just beneath the surface. Something about her reminded him of his mother, strong, proud, but exhausted. He saw not just her struggle, but the loneliness in it. And in that moment, something shifted inside him. He tightened his grip on his duffel bag and took a step toward her. "Mom," he said, his voice low and calm amidst the clamor. "Can I give you a hand with those?" She looked up, surprised eyes, a striking blue that seemed to pierce through the noise around them. And for a second, Derrick felt like time had paused, not for his flight, not for the job, but for something far more human. Eleanor Green blinked in surprise, then offered Derrick a tired but gracious smile. "Well, I wouldn't say no," she replied, a touch of dry humor softening the corners of her lips. "These bags have gained weight while I wasn't looking." Derrick chuckled lightly and hoisted the suitcase with ease, noting its vintage leather trim and the way her fingers briefly hesitated, as if letting go of it meant surrendering more than just a physical burden. He placed the suitcase on the conveyor with practiced grace, then motioned for her to go ahead through the scanner. She stepped slowly through the metal detector, pausing as the TSA agent gave her a brief nod. Derrick followed after brushing off the irritated glances of those behind them who clearly weren't thrilled with the delay. He gathered her items carefully on the other side, purse, shoes, carry-on, handing each one over with the kind of attentiveness rarely seen in crowded terminals. Eleanor gave him a small nod of thanks, her expression unreadable but not ungrateful. As they made their way toward her gate, Derrick asked gently, "Traveling somewhere special?" "Business," she said vaguely, then glanced toward the floor. Though at my age, even that becomes personal. Her voice carried layers, strength, exhaustion, and something else he couldn't quite place. As they walked, her pace slowed and she winced slightly. "Didn't eat this morning," she murmured, her knees unsteady. Derrick instinctively reached for her elbow, guiding her to a bench near a coffee kiosk without hesitation. "You sit," he said. "I'll be right back." Minutes later, he returned with hot tea, a granola bar, and a blueberry muffin. He handed them to her with a shrug. These looked fresh. Eleanor accepted the food with quiet gratitude. She sipped her tea, then looked at him curiously. "What brings you to the airport today?" Derrick hesitated, then smiled. "Job interview. Biggest one I've had in 10 years. Her eyes drifted upward to a nearby screen. "Charlotte, Flight 212. She asked, her tone soft. He nodded. Or was. For a moment, Eleanor froze. "You missed it because of me." Derrick waved her off. "You needed help. That was the right call." She didn't speak right away, but the way she looked at him, steady searching, told him she understood far more than she let on. "You did a good thing," she said. "Most people don't stop anymore." And with that, they continued toward her gate, one slow step at a time. By the time they reached gate 49A, Derrick knew he wasn't going to make his flight. The boarding call had come and gone, and the final gate check had already closed. But something in him was at peace. He had done what he knew was right, and despite the looming weight of uncertainty pressing on his shoulders, he didn't regret a thing. Eleanor eased into a seat near the window, her hands wrapped around the tea Derrick had given her, and he placed her carry-on carefully at her feet. She adjusted her coat and turned to him, eyes narrowing slightly with concern. "Are you going to be all right?" she asked. Her voice was steady, but carried that maternal tone he hadn't heard since his mother's last hospital visit. Derrick nodded, trying to hide the slight sag in his posture. "I'll figure it out," he said quietly, though even he wasn't sure what that meant. His phone was down to 2%, and his last few dollars had gone to tea and muffins. Eleanor didn't say anything for a moment. Then slowly she reached into her handbag and pulled out a small notepad with a monogrammed EG etched into the leather. She scribbled something down, tore the page carefully, and folded it twice. She then placed it into Derrick's hand, pressing it gently into his palm. "You'll need this later," she said. Voice even but unreadable. "Just in case I don't see you again." Derrick looked at her, eyebrows raised. "What is it?" She smiled softly. "A thank you." He tucked the paper into his wallet without looking and offered a handshake which she took firmly, despite the frailty in her fingers. "Thank you for walking with me," she said. "Most people don't walk anymore. They just rush." Her words echoed in his chest as she stood and headed toward the boarding lane. He watched her hand her pass to the gate agent, who barely looked up. The display blinked first class, and that alone caught Derrick's attention. Eleanor Green, with her worn coat and humble eyes, was flying first class. He blinked again, confused, but said nothing. She disappeared into the jet bridge, and for a moment, silence surrounded him like a slow fog. The energy from earlier was gone, replaced with something heavier. With no flight, no plan, and nowhere to go, Derrick walked slowly through the terminal, past vending machines and echoing announcements, until he reached the empty benches near baggage claim. He set his duffel down, sank onto the cold metal seat, and stared at the floor. For the first time that day, he felt truly alone, but in his wallet, a folded note waited quietly, holding the promise that maybe, just maybe, his story wasn't over yet. Hours passed slowly as Derrick sat slumped on a cold bench near the baggage claim, the rhythmic whir of the conveyor belts echoing in the distance like a ticking clock. The crowds had thinned, the announcements had quieted, and the sun outside had dipped below the horizon. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly. Derrick's phone was dead now, his stomach growling from hunger, his duffel bag a weary anchor at his side. He reached into his wallet and pulled out the folded paper Eleanor had given him hours earlier. He hadn't read it. Not yet. Something in him hadn't wanted to hope. With tired fingers, he unfolded the note. The handwriting was elegant looping script that simply read, "Stay right here. I'll find you." No signature. No explanation. Just those 6 words hanging heavy in his hands. Derrick stared at the message, rereading it over and over. Was it just a gesture? A metaphor for something he didn't understand? He almost laughed at how absurd it seemed, how it made no logical sense. Yet somehow, it didn't feel empty. It felt intentional. 45 minutes later, the sliding doors to the terminal opened with a gust of cold air, and Derrick didn't look up at first. But then a voice rang out crisp and clear, cutting through the silence. Mr. Coleman. A sharply dressed man in a charcoal grey suit stood by a sleek black sedan just outside the terminal. Miss Green has sent for you. May I take your bag? Derrick blinked stunned, then stood slowly. Wait, Eleanor. You mean Eleanor Green? The driver smiled. Yes, sir. She's waiting. As Derrick approached the car, the back door opened. There she was, no longer in her worn coat and travel-wrinkled scarf, but dressed in a tailored navy blazer over a silk blouse, her silver hair now pinned neatly. She looked every bit the executive, and somehow, still the same woman who had winced lifting her suitcase. I told you I'd find you, she said warmly, her voice unwavering. Derrick just stared, bewildered. What? What is this? Eleanor gestured toward the car. Come with me, Derrick. You missed your flight, but I didn't forget what you gave up for me. I have my own jet, and we're going to Charlotte tonight. Derrick hesitated, still reeling. Your own jet? She smiled with a knowing twinkle in her eyes. SkyLuxe Airlines. I started it 22 years ago. She tilted her head. Come along. We have much to discuss. As the car pulled away from the terminal and wound its way through a private access road, Derrick sat in stunned silence, the leather seat soft beneath him. His worn clothes felt even more out of place in this polished world. But Eleanor didn't look at him like he didn't belong. She looked at him like she'd been expecting him all along. The jet was gleaming white, with gold-accented wings, parked quietly on a private runway. Derrick followed Eleanor up the steps, still unsure if he was dreaming. Inside the aircraft was nothing like the cramped cabins he'd grown used to. It felt more like a luxury suite, plush cream leather seats, polished wood paneling, warm ambient lighting, and a faint scent of cedar and citrus in the air. Eleanor took a seat across from him, unbothered by his awkwardness, and motioned for him to do the same. The hum of the engines began to build beneath them. She poured herself a glass of champagne, while Derrick was offered bottled water. For a while they sat quietly, the sound of takeoff as smooth as a whisper. Then she turned to him, her tone shifting. Do you know anything about aircraft mechanics? Derrick shrugged. Not much, he admitted. Cars, yes. But planes, that's a whole different beast. She smiled. Not as different as you think. They both respond to those who listen carefully. Eleanor leaned forward, her hands folded neatly. SkyLuxe isn't just about business class tickets and lounge access. We're building something bigger. A global aviation training program, one that reaches places overlooked by traditional pipelines. We're opening centers in Ghana, Vietnam, Colombia. Starting small. 50 apprentices per site. Local hires. Hands-on skills. Her eyes sparkled. We're not just fixing planes. We're giving people a shot at building something meaningful. Derrick listened, his heartbeat quickening. She spoke with a clarity that was both inspiring and disarming. And I want you to lead one of them, she said. Accra, Ghana. Our first site is nearly built. We need a technical director, someone with experience, grit, and heart. You'd be mentoring young talent, teaching them not just the tools, but the mindset. You've lived that life. You know what it means to build from nothing. He stared at her, stunned. Why me? He asked quietly. You barely know me. Eleanor's voice softened. You helped someone when you had every reason not to. You missed your shot at a job to make sure a stranger made it to her gate. You led with character when no one was watching. That tells me everything I need to know. She slid a folder across the table to him. Inside was an official offer, Technical Director, SkyLuxe Global Academy, Accra, Ghana. It came with a competitive salary, housing international benefits, and full education support for his son. Derrick stared at the papers, the words blurring slightly as his mind raced. You don't have to sign tonight, Eleanor said gently. But this isn't just a job. It's a path. You choose what matters most. The next morning, the Charlotte skyline shimmered in the sunlight as Derrick walked into the Velocity Motors headquarters. He'd stayed the night in a downtown hotel, still processing the whirlwind of the past 12 hours. He wore the same button-down from yesterday, freshly ironed by the hotel's front desk clerk, who offered it without question. His shoes, polished with a hand towel, squeaked faintly against the floor as he stepped into the elevator and pressed floor 15. At Suite 1507, a man in a crisp grey suit greeted him with a firm handshake. Derrick Coleman. Right, I'm Greg Turner, Director of Technical Operations. We've reviewed your application's solid hands-on experience. We like what we see. Derrick nodded politely, unsure what to say. The interview began smoothly enough questions about diagnostic protocols, team leadership time under the hood. Derrick answered with practiced confidence, recalling years of problem-solving in poorly lit garages. Then came the curveball. You'd be working under our new technical supervisor, Kyle Dawson, fresh from his master's at Michigan Tech. We think he'll bring fresh academic insight while you'll offer boots-on-the-ground expertise. You two should complement each other well. Derrick didn't flinch, but the implication was clear. He'd be answering to someone who'd never had grease under his fingernails. Turner continued. Hours are 6 to 4:30 Monday through Saturday. Overtime optional, but strongly encouraged. Starting salaries $58,000 with review in 18 months. Full benefits package. You'd begin next Monday. Derrick nodded again. He didn't hate the offer. It was honest work and the structure was familiar. But even as he heard the numbers, something inside him felt flat. Can I have 24 hours to think about it? He asked. Turner paused. We're down to 2 finalists. You can have until tomorrow morning. Derrick thanked him, stood and walked out into the bright Carolina morning. The sky felt wide but far away. His thoughts drifted not to Velocity Motors, but to the file folder in his duffel bag marked SkyLuxe Academy, Ghana. That evening, his phone buzzed with a message from Eleanor Dinner. 7 p.m., the Lantern Rooftop. Come hungry. Derrick stared at the message for a moment, then changed his shirt, took a deep breath, and headed toward the address. Part of him was already leaning toward a path he never saw coming. The Lantern was a quiet, rooftop restaurant that overlooked the Charlotte skyline, its glass walls reflecting the soft golds and purples of the setting sun. Derrick arrived just as the host led him to a private corner table, already set for 2, no menus, no wait time. Eleanor Green stood by the window, her presence serene but unmistakably firm. She turned as he approached. You made it, she said with a gentle smile. I figured you might have some decisions to make. They sat, and as the hum of the city surrounded them, Eleanor leaned forward, folding her hands on the table. Tell me about the offer, she said, her tone without judgment. Derrick laid it out, the hours, the pay, the hierarchy. It's honest, he said. It'll keep the lights on. She nodded slowly, never breaking eye contact. Yes, but will it light you up inside? He looked away, hands clasped tightly in his lap. 6 months ago, I would have said yes on the spot. But now, he trailed off. Eleanor didn't push. She waited. Then finally, she said, sometimes we outgrow the version of success we used to pray for. That doesn't make it wrong. It just means we're ready for more. She reached into her satchel and pulled out the same folder again. She laid it gently in front of him. We need someone in Accra. The facility's ready. The students are waiting. We've built the walls, but we need someone to fill it with purpose. Her voice didn't waver. The offer includes everything we discussed, plus education for your son. But more than that, it gives you meaning. And meaning lasts longer than money. Derrick swallowed hard. You barely know me? Eleanor smiled. I know enough. I know how you treat strangers. I know you gave up something for someone else. And I know character when I see it. The air was still between them. Then slowly Derrick reached for the folder. The pen beside it felt heavier than any wrench he'd ever held. He didn't sign it yet, but he didn't push it away either. Sometimes he realized the future isn't found on a resume. It walks beside you in the form of someone who believes. The folder sat unopened on Derrick's hotel desk that night, its edges crisp, its pages filled with possibilities that felt just out of reach. He didn't rush. He paced, sat down, stood again. The city glowed outside the window, but his thoughts were somewhere else: on his son, on his father's calloused hands, on the feel of Eleanor's note still tucked safely in his wallet. And then, without fanfare, Derrick reached for the pen. With one firm stroke of ink across the signature line, he chose the unknown. 18 months later, the sun rose over the red clay soil of Accra, Ghana, casting long shadows across the modern lines of the SkyLuxe Global Academy. Derrick stood on a second-story balcony overlooking the compound, now dressed in a navy uniform, bearing the SkyLuxe emblem wings outstretched around a rising sun. Below him, a group of students worked in sync, their hands guiding wires, testing hydraulic systems, and marking data on digital tablets. They moved with purpose, with pride, with belief. Derrick didn't just teach them how to repair aircraft. He taught them how to think like engineers, to trust their instincts to solve problems when manuals came up short. He built a culture of mentorship, one grounded in respect, accountability, and quiet confidence. Some days he led lectures in the open-air courtyard. Other days he worked side by side with apprentices under the wing of a grounded Cessna. Either way, he showed up early, stayed late, and poured himself into the work. But more than the tools, what changed Derrick most was watching others rise. He saw a 19-year-old girl from Kumasi troubleshoot a fuel line faster than any first-year mechanic he'd known in the States. He watched a former street vendor explain thermal pressure to his peers like he was born for the classroom. These weren't just students. They were legacy in motion. And Derrick, once a man who nearly slept on an airport bench, was now a builder of futures. When he spoke, they listened, not because of titles or authority, but because they saw someone who had walked a hard road and hadn't forgotten what it felt like. The training center thrived and word spread. SkyLuxe Academy was changing lives, and the industry noticed. Partners called. Airlines sent inquiries. Derrick stayed grounded in his purpose, never distracted by attention. In quiet moments, he still thought about the airport, about Eleanor's voice, about the note that changed everything. That night in Charlotte, he didn't just sign a contract. He stepped into a life that would ripple out into dozens, then hundreds. And as the African sun warmed his face each morning, he knew he hadn't just chosen a job. He had chosen a legacy. The black SUV rolled up to the training compound just after noon, its tinted windows glinting under the midday sun. Derrick stood at the top of the steps, hands lightly folded, heart thudding with anticipation. The door opened slowly, and Eleanor Green stepped out in a linen blazer, her silver hair pinned back neatly, dark sunglasses in hand. Time had softened her gait, but not her presence. As she approached, Derrick broke into a wide smile. "Welcome back," he said, extending his hand. She took it firmly, holding it just a second longer than protocol required. "You look like you belong here," she said, her eyes scanning the campus dormitories, workshops, rows of students in clean uniforms. "I feel like I do," Derrick replied, glancing down at the courtyard below, where a group of students had paused their work to wave respectfully. Most days, anyway. They walked slowly through the hangar together, past tool carts and diagnostic tables, the sound of training buzzing all around them. Eleanor observed everything occasionally, nodding occasionally, pausing to speak to a student. But her attention was clearly focused on Derrick, on the way his team responded to him, the way the facility had grown beyond the blueprint into something alive. She looked pleased, proud, but also thoughtful. "São Paulo," she said at last casually. "We break ground in 5 months. We'll need someone there who understands what this is supposed to feel like." Derrick raised an eyebrow. "You're offering me the next one." Eleanor smiled. "I'm offering you the choice," she said. "Same as before, no pressure. But I trust you, Derrick. More than that, I believe in your vision." He said nothing at first, just stared out across the runway where a new group of trainees practiced engine diagnostics. So much had changed since that airport bench, but Eleanor's trust that had remained steady. Their relationship had evolved, no longer just benefactor and recipient, CEO and recruit. They were partners now, co-architects of something bold and transformative. They shared an unspoken language built not on status but on belief. Eleanor had bet on his character. Derrick had risen not with ego but with purpose. Together they had reshaped what opportunity looked like. As the day waned, Eleanor prepared to return to the States. But before she climbed back into the SUV, she turned once more to Derrick and said simply, "They know who you are now. And not because of your title, but because you stayed. You showed up even when it was hard." He nodded, gratitude swelling in his chest. She smiled. "We'll talk soon. São Paulo needs someone steady." The door closed, and just like that, she was gone again. But the path forward was clearer than ever. That evening, Derrick sat alone in his small corner office, the walls lined with whiteboards, technical manuals, and framed photographs of his students. A soft breeze drifted in through the open window. On his desk sat two things: a picture of his father, grease-stained hands wrapped around a rusted wrench, and a small framed note with fading ink that still read, "Stay right here. I'll find you." He leaned back in his chair, his eyes tracing the words he had read 100 times before. He thought about the day he missed his flight, about the split-second decision to stop and help, about the fear, the sacrifice, the way that simple act had cracked open a different future. Derrick had walked into that airport just a mechanic with dreams, and now he was a leader shaping the lives of young men and women on the other side of the world. He didn't regret a single step. His son, now 11, was thriving in a bilingual school nearby, already asking questions about thrust torque and electrical systems. Derrick smiled every time he heard him explain circuits to classmates like he'd been born with a schematic in his hand. The boy didn't just see his father as someone who worked with tools. He saw him as someone who built possibility. And the ripple effect didn't stop there. Dozens of students had graduated from the program. Some had gone on to work at major airlines. Others had returned to teach. They carried not just skills, but values, integrity, patience, the ability to see dignity in everyone. Derrick's father had once said, "Real legacy isn't what you leave behind, it's what you pass forward." He saw that legacy in every lesson taught under the shade of the hangar roof, in every tool handed from teacher to apprentice, in every question asked with hope. His life wasn't perfect, but it was full and meaningful and honest. And it had all begun because he had chosen to walk alongside someone instead of rushing past. He reached for the framed note one last time before shutting off the lights for the night. The ink was fading, but the message was not. Because it wasn't about the words, it was about what they had set in motion. And in the quiet of that Ghanaian night, Derrick knew this for certain: he had been found, and in being found, he had found his purpose. Sometimes life disguises beginnings as endings: a missed flight, a lost opportunity, an unplanned detour. For Derrick Coleman, that moment in the terminal could have been a footnote, a frustrating chapter of what could have been. But instead, it became a doorway. Because what feels like a failure isn't always the closing of a path. Sometimes it's a redirection towards something far greater. Helping Eleanor that day wasn't strategic, it wasn't planned, it was inconvenient, risky, and unrewarded, at least in the moment. But the power of kindness is that it plants seeds in places we cannot see. And when those seeds bloom, they create forests of change, of opportunity, of connection. One man's decision to stop became a blueprint for 100 others to rise. This story reminds us never underestimate the impact of a single act of compassion, especially when no one is watching, especially when it cost you something, because the world notices. And sometimes the very person you help might just hold the key to your next chapter. So if you find yourself rushing through life, chasing what's next, remember this story. Slow down, look around, choose to help. Not because of what you'll get, but because of who you'll become. Because leadership doesn't always wear a title, and greatness doesn't always arrive on time. Derrick didn't just gain a new job or a better life. He gained a purpose. a mission, a chance to lift others the same way he once needed lifting. And all of it, every piece of it, began with a choice to carry someone's bags instead of walking by. So the next time you face a fork in the road when you're deciding between convenience and kindness, choose kindness. Because every missed flight might just be a different runway. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the power of kindness and the unexpected ways life rewards integrity, then stay with us. At Deep Inside HQ, we believe that real leadership isn't about position, it's about character. And the smallest choices often carry the greatest meaning. So hit the like button if you believe in second chances. Subscribe to our channel for more stories that reveal the strength of everyday people and the humanity behind unlikely moments. And don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss the next story that just might shift your perspective or your heart.